welcome all of you. So, in the previous lecture we covered different approaches for environmental management and studied PDCA cycle. In this class, let us continue with the discussion on environmental management system, one of the approaches of environmental management, which is a well documented structured approach. Then one of the important part of this course is guide to developing an EMS. Like if some startup or any company wish to set up a EMS, environment management system, in their organization, what is the guide to developing that? That we will cover. And in that guide there are different factors which need to be taken into account. So, in today's lecture we will try to cover aspects, impacts, objectives and targets with some examples, and there are some more factors in that guide which will be covered in the next lecture. So, environmental management system, as I had said earlier also, it is type of it is certified like ISO 14001. ISO 14001 itself is a certified environmental management system. So, this ISO 14001 defines EMS as the part of the overall management system. So, if you are talking about any organization, any company, it is a part of that organization. So, it is a overall management, there is a system and it is a part of that system. So, it is basically a system which is going to have some specific responsibilities. Okay. So, it is a part of overall system, overall management system, that includes organizational structure, planning activities, responsibilities, practices, procedures, processes and resources. So, any organizations, any system, it includes these things. It has a proper structure, it has proper plan, it has a team with different people having different responsibilities. Then there are some practices, procedures and processes which each system or each part of the organization do on a daily basis, and then there are resources given to each department within the organization to self sustain or to manage themselves or to sustain. So, this EMS is also a part of that system. It has all these things, it has a structure, it has planning activities, responsibilities, team, processes and some resources. For what? For developing, implementing, achieving and reviewing the environmental policy. As the name indicates, environmental management system. So, the first step is like you set up a environmental policy or the goal of the company, where the company wish to go or wish to achieve something with respect to environment. So, once that policy is defined, how to achieve the goals of that policy and how to develop that policy or implement the actions oriented towards achieving the goals of policy, all these things would come under environmental management system. It will be the responsibility of EMS to develop policy, to implement plans, to develop procedures, to develop like actions, to use resources and then try to achieve the goals of environmental policy. And if there is a need to change environmental policy also, it should undertake that review also, because that is the continuous improvement, it is at the core of any environmental management system. So, the goals of EMS, it is similar to the goals of environmental management, right. It's minimize the impacts on environment caused by a process or product. The objective is to comply with administrative and regional regulations or the compliances, utilization of resources efficiently, improve the company's reputation and build better relations among stakeholders. So, all these are the goals of EMS. So, basically it helps to improve the green image or the environmental image of a company, which may help improve the company's reputation and build better customer trust or base. And while accounting for or while putting efforts for reducing impacts on environment in the race or in the objective of like obeying the compliances, we also end up utilizing the resources efficiently and minimizing the impacts on environment. So, environmental management system will define how a company will identify, assess, monitor and maintain its interactions with the environment. So, there are n number of activities in a company which may have impact on the environment. So, all those activities or the interactions with the environment should be identified, should be assessed, should be monitored, and then maintaining those interactions in a healthy manner. So, all those things will come under the scope of EMS. Now, coming to the main point, guide for developing an EMS. What exactly is an EMS? What is that environmental management system in the company and what are its function? How do we develop it, and once we develop it, how does it operate? So, first thing is to identify environmental aspects and undertake risk impact assessment. So, think of it from a perspective of, let us say, a startup. So, if there is one startup producing something, it lists down all the activities or the environmental aspects and do the impact assessment, find that what are the environmental impacts of its activities. Now, once that is done, it will develop an environmental policy and make a team. So, once we know the activities of the company, then we know the environmental impacts, the possible environmental impacts, because we are doing this risk assessment, it is based on the data. Then you develop an environmental policy and make a team. So, policy would be obviously focus in that particular direction. If that startup is having a very huge impact on water bodies, so environmental policy will be focused on maintaining the water quality or water body. Then set objectives and targets related to environment. So, policy is basically a vision or mission document which is very broad. It is like a direction in which the entire organization has to put their efforts in, but objectives and targets will contribute to achieving that policy. Just like when we write some proposal for funding, the title of the proposal can be called as a policy, but then there are specific objectives which we want to achieve under that proposal, and in each objective there can be some specific targets, time bound targets. So, those are the, that is how the hierarchy goes. You have a policy, then objectives and targets. Now, whether those targets are achieved or not, and what are the key indicators which would determine the quality of the target, those are called as KPIs, key performance indicators. For example, if reducing water pollution or reducing impact on water bodies is our objective, and target is reducing BOD by say 10%, then BOD can be a key KPI, target is that 10% and the time frame can be like within 1 month or within 2 months. So, that is the key performance indicators. So, once we did that, you develop and plan procedures and systems. How we are going to achieve those objectives and targets, those KPIs, for that you need procedures and systems in place. So, to plan and develop that procedure and system is a part of EMS. Then once you plan and develop those procedures, you implement these procedures and systems. You involve employees, your team, you assign resources, you give them time bound objectives and directions. So, that implementation is also the part of or the job or role of the environmental management system. Once you implement those plans, procedures and try to achieve those objectives and targets, how will you know whether they are on track or not, whether they are achieved properly or not? So, for that you do the monitoring or result and then audit performance, and finally you do the continuous improvement through review. When I say review, it will be review of almost each of these things that we covered so far: aspect, policy, objective, target, plan, procedures, the way of implementation, monitoring and auditing. Each of these previous 4, 5, 6, 7 points can be reviewed for continuous improvement. So, after this guide for developing an EMS, let us look at like what each of these things mean. The first thing is aspect and impact. So, aspects, these are the elements of organization's activities, products or services that can interact with the environment. For example, air emissions, water and waste discharge, electricity usage, energy usage, use of nature. So, all these are active elements which can have impact on environment. For example, if there is a air emission from our factory, it is going to cause air pollution. If there is a waste discharge into a nearby water body, it is going to cause water pollution. Okay. So, the discharge of wastewater from the company is a aspect. Emissions of flue gases from the chimney into the atmosphere is a aspect. it causes air pollution, water discharge will cause water pollution. So, all these are different types of aspects. Here like you have some examples: storage, use, transportation, non-renewable energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, hazardous waste, different types of waste, different types of pollutants, emissions, liquid discharge. So, all these are the activities or the elements which can have impact on environment, and they fall under the category of aspect. So, once we identify aspect, next step is to identify the impact. What is impact? It is a change in the environment. Any change in the environment, whether it is adverse or beneficial, it can be positive or it can be negative. All the changes in the environment need not be negative all the time. If you do tree plantation, if you do reforestation, again that is a aspect, but and it can have a positive environmental impact. Okay. So, wholly or partially resulting from an organization's activities, products or processes. It is very much associated with aspect. Every aspect is going to have a impact. So, that impact should be measured. There are different categories of impact because there are different components of environment. We have air, water, soil, then surroundings, then biodiversity. Okay. So, each of these components in the environment can be affected. So, you see climate change, eutrophication, land use, resource depletion, ecotoxicity, acidification. So, these are all possible impacts on the environment. So, now that aspects and impacts are understood, let us try to look at it with respect to example of a ready mix concrete unit. So, this is a unit where a ready mix concrete is prepared, and then that can be used for construction of buildings. So, the aspects involved in this concrete unit, obviously it needs fuel, it needs the raw material for making cement, it needs some transportation like the delivery of cement, delivery of concrete, it needs lot of washing, a lot of use of electricity and other energy sources. So, even the storage of fuel is the environmental aspect, because if it spills and if it leaks, there will be an environmental impact. Delivery of cement to facility, there will be some noise of the vehicles which carry cement, there will be air emissions from the vehicles. Again the delivery of concrete, truck washout, whenever you wash something, it is to remove, to clean it. So, all the dust particles would be ending up in water. So, the processed water or the used water, waste water would be the environmental impact. Then electricity use will cause pollution or global warming. Recycled paper use, see recycled paper, if we use recycled paper, it is an aspect, but it is going to have a positive impact on environment, which is conservation of natural resources. Similarly, if we recycle concrete or whatever concrete is returned, we use it again it will lead to conservation of natural resources. So, as you can see, impact can be adverse or beneficial, and aspect can be any element associated with the product, process or activity of a organization. Now, third thing was objective and fourth is target, right. Keep remembering that all these terminologies we are studying as a part of guide to developing an EMS. So, these things are always with reference to EMS. So, when I say aspect, it is again environmental aspect, objective it is again EMS objective. So, EMS objective is overall goal which is arising from the environmental policy statements set by the organization. Making that policy may be the job of top management with the help of environmental manager, or environmental management system can also contribute to form the policy if it is already in place. But if policy has already been in place and EMS is adopted later as ISO 14001, there is a potential for reviewing or doing some modification in that policy. Okay. So, that comes under the umbrella of EMS. So, objective is the goal arising from that policy document which is set by the organization. The common environmental objectives would be to increase environmental awareness and to improve working practices. Okay. Here it should be improve. Then develop skills in new areas including product design, reduce emissions, promote energy efficiency, attract green. These are some examples of common objectives so far as environment is concerned. And as you can see, objective is a generic statement which shows the direction in which we have to move, but target, it is a specific measurable performance related to that objective. For example, reducing environmental impact can be objective. In fact, reducing air emissions can be a specific objective, but when we specify that how much by 20% in how much time in 1 year, that is the example of a target. So, it is a specific measurable performance and related to the objective. This is example of Tata Group targets, like you can see different years like 2005, 2024 they have action plan for next positive impact. Then 2025 they want to more than double the content of renewable, 2030 25% reduction. So, you see there is some numeric specification with respect to time frame. So, that is the example of target. Let us try to cover all 4 together now. So, for EMS objectives and targets would be like based on environmental policy, okay, and it may also contribute to form one environmental policy if it is not in place at first instant, and aspects and impacts will help us to determine objectives and targets. So, it can go either direction towards the policy, or if we have policy set up, it can go in the reverse direction also. Okay. So, that is what is shown here in this figure. So, if we have objectives and targets, it can lead to environmental policy. Some information can be gained from initial review or impact aspect evaluation, and it is a two-way process. If you have policy, you do it like this. If you do not have policy, you still do aspect impact evaluation, set objectives, set targets, and then come up with a policy for that company with the help of EMS. So, let us take one example more. So, if there is a heavy metal discharge from any factory in a nearby water body. So, what is going to be the impact? It will degrade the aquatic life and it will also degrade the water supply where those heavy metals are discharged. Now, that is the aspect of a company or a sewage treatment plant which is sending heavy metals into water body. That is the impact of degradation of environmental component. Here it is water and aquatic life. What would be the objective? For with respect to the company or factory sending that heavy metals, objective can be minimize the discharge of metals. So, that is a fair enough objective, but then what would be the target? It should have some specifics, reduce metals discharge by 20% in 1 year. Again, that target should be realistic and feasible. Okay. So, reducing metal discharge by 20% in 1 year is a target. Similarly, if that factory is generating solid waste, it is the aspect, and if that solid waste is generated and thrown into the landfill or near the water body, the impact would be degradation of land, the habitat and the drinking water supply. In that case, for with respect to that particular aspect and impact, the objective will be to minimize either solid waste generation or to maximize recycling of non-hazardous materials. So, if you recycle non-hazardous material, that solid waste generation would go down automatically, but then target would be to giving some specific recycle 50% of plastics and metals by 2 years, within 2 years. So, these are the examples of aspect, impact, objective and target. You can do this activity with respect to one organization, or you can have with respect to multiple organizations, or it can be it need not be always with reference to a company. It can be with reference to any organization, it can be with reference to university, it can be with reference to a government organization, an online business. Okay. Each of these organizations are going to have some elements which is going to be aspect and impact would be associated with those aspects, and if there are aspect and impact, you can always have the objectives and targets. So, to summarize, in this lecture what we covered was environmental management system. It is based on ISO 14001. So, definition of this was also given by ISO, and the continuous improvement loop that forms the basis, or it is at the core of the EMS, and since it is a structured framework, it is most widely used by corporate sector and private businesses. Guide to developing EMS. So, there were those 7-8 points, right, 8 steps were there as a guide to developing EMS which we went through, and in that there were some points starting from environmental policy, aspects, impacts, objectives, targets, and then setting up KPIs, monitoring, auditing, reviewing. So, those points we will be covering in the next lecture. So, these 4 we have covered so far with some example, and the remaining ones that would be covered in the next lecture. Thank you so much.